Welcome and thanks for listening to the Decoding the Truth podcast, where we bring conspiracy theories on to talk about their beliefs about an event. Today we will be discussing the events of the Boston Marathon bombing.
On April 15, 2013, in Boston, Massachusetts, an annual marathon is being held for the public holiday known as Patriots' Day. On this day, just meters from the finish line, as people began to finish the marathon, an explosion went off, killing three people, two young women and a child, and injuring around 200 people.
The suspects behind the bombing were brothers Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Senard. They had planted two homemade pressure cooker bombs that detonated near the finish line of the race. Both have prior history with being American terrorists and have been subject to inquiry by the U.S. government.
Today we're exploring the conspiracy theories that emerged around this event, beliefs that the bombing was staged, a political move, or worse, that it was a covert attack orchestrated to blame specific groups. So our guests on this episode represent different perspectives, from those who firmly believe it's hidden plots to skeptics who are ready to unpack the facts.
Today we have Caleb, Andres, and Matthew, prominent believers against the Boston bombing events. Caleb, what's your stance on the Boston bombing?
Honestly, the Boston bombing just has to be staged. I can't believe people are feeding into this. There's so many clear answers to what truly happened that day outside of what is being told. If you bear with us, we may be able to open your eyes to what really happened.
Andres, what do you think?
But they want us to think, right? Look at the footage. They all had the cameras they had all the cameras in the right places. Doesn't it make you wonder if it's scripted? Because to me, it honestly does. I mean, if you look at when one of the bombers leaves his backpack, no one questions it. Like, who sees that and doesn't ask any questions? Someone would have said something. And also, the people that were there that day were crisis actors. Just look at the pictures. That guy with his leg blown off is clearly fake.
Caleb, you were right there. Do you want to add something?
The take I have on this is that it was controlled by the government. Good points to include in this timeline is a Facebook post being created for lost victims to the bombing being created beforehand, along with bomb squads having prior knowledge to the bombings. The government and media are working together in New World Order to create essentially a false flag operation perpetrated by them in order to create a public fear in hopes that they can continue to take control over the populace. Evidence also suggests that there was a third bomber and that they were a part of an elite private security firm known as Kraft International, with photos from the day showing that people from this security group had almost identical clothing to the bombers. I believe these groups are tied together.
Matthew, what do you think about the bombing being staged?
No, this bombing happened because them Muslim immigrants coming over and trying to destroy our good country. We already saw what they're capable of back when our Twin Towers fell. This was just another attack on our true American values.
While these theories may sound convincing to some, history and research paints a different story. The Boston Marathon bombing was a catalyst, a moment that reshaped security practices in the US. Yes, but that deeply impacted American identity. So scholars like DeRamses Combs and David McCoskey have explored how events like these aren't just about physical security, they're also about psychological security, about drawing the boundaries between us and them, even when those boundaries are complicated. So Caleb, Matthew, and Andres, what you're describing is part of what scholars call the new conspiracism, a form of conspiracy theory that doesn't need evidence, just allegations. In chapter one of The Culture of the Conspiracy, this shift is explained as a dangerous departure from traditional conspiracisms, which at least sought to make sense of complex events. Today's conspiracies, though, aren't about explanations, they're about creating doubt. And that doubt erodes trust in the democratic institutions, and people no longer know what to believe in, who or what to trust.
So immediately following the events, FBI and law enforcement agencies requested any bit of digital evidence available that may have captured scenes of the bombing. It is not unrealistic to have so much footage readily available with the technological advancements of the time. Nearly every storefront has security cameras. There are multiple photo and videos capturing the brothers in the process of planting the bombs, as well as footage from civilians. If it was really fake, how would the organization behind it have been able to get everyone, civilians, and businesses involved in faking footage?
Caleb, the photos you're referring to for a third person being involved do have men with similar clothing, but as were many others who dress that way, being black jackets and khaki-colored pants. The reality is that the government investigated the brothers and found that the two had been radicalized through their time in the Soviet Union and with access to the internet. It was just them two who had looked up how to make pressure cooker bombs through an Al-Qaeda radical militant site and support their Islamic extremist views. As for the mercenaries, they're needed at the scene of the crime because it was a large terrorist attack. It's an all hands on deck situation.
Yo, Matt, I understand that when traffic events happen like this, it's easy to jump to conclusions and think that a specific group is at fault. And I find it ironic that you're trying to blame Muslim immigrants, keyword being immigrants, when America is made of immigrants. But on a real note, do you really think it's fair to blame and generalize millions of people because of the actions of just two people? If we try to blame the Muslim immigrants, isn't that discrediting all the contributions they've had to this country, like becoming doctors, teachers, and even taxpayers?
I mean, there is more to that. They push this whole narrative with suspect, police chases, and shootout. It's likely they crafted a movie plot to keep people scared and tune in. The news shows exactly what they want us to see. I get that it feels real, but that's how they keep us locked in fear. Look how everyone reacts to panic, confusion, and anger. Don't you think how weird they quickly resolved everything?
Undress. I get that it feels like it's a movie plot. There were chases, standoffs, and ultimately a sense of resolution. But that doesn't mean it was scripted. There were real events with real people. Research shows that media coverage is intense in events like this because viewers demand it. And that the idea that events were quickly resolved is partly a misconception. It might have seemed that way, but the investigations went on for months, and many aspects of it were painstakingly detailed and recorded.
What about the obvious connection the CIA has to the Boston bombings? The brother's uncle was dating the CIA's former chief daughter. While they were dating, he lived with his daughter, which was in the chief's house, which they made a Chechen organization discontinued due to deemed financier to terrorism. Since this person made this organization was so close to the CIA, it essentially credits that the CIA is tied into the scheme of the staged bombing.
Caleb, that connection may sound intriguing, but it's a leap to say it proves anything about the CIA's involvement in the bombing. Robert can confirm that families and personal networks are complex. The fact that the Tesnorov brothers' uncle had a connection to someone in the CIA doesn't mean that the agency was orchestrating anything. In fact, the government's handling of this was flawed precisely because the FBI had limited insight in what the Tamerlan brothers were doing.
Right, Yesenia. In fact, David Markovsky research on the bombing shows that if anything, the government's lack of coordination may have been a factor here, not some orchestrated scheme. Tarleton's contacts were flagged by Russian intelligence to the US, and yet the FBI and CIA didn't share information effectively. This was likely due to a bureaucratic gap, not hidden intentions. Caleb, remember that the new conspiracism often thrives on loose associations, what Professor Nicholas called truth in the phenomenon, where any connection, no matter how thin, is seen as proof, but without solid evidence, it's a dangerous stretch.
This event gave us true blood Americans something to rally around again. After the bombing of 9/11, President Bush came out and lied to us by telling us Muslims were not our enemies and that it was Al Qaeda. But this bombing shows that he was wrong. When asked if he was already blaming the Muslims, my friend Eric Rush, who's a highly esteemed Fox News contributor, responded with, "Yes, I think they're evil." And I think this sums up how us true Americans feel and have a right to feel on this matter.
As we heard earlier, our guest brought up that they believed the CIA had involvement in the bombing because of a loose relationship between the brother's uncle and the daughter of a former CIA chief. Conspiracy theorists like to piece together random pieces of information and make a story out of it. In reality, there's no evidence or real basis for the theory, and it's another grasp at straws. It's a theme we commonly see among theorists known as bricolage.
How people tend to blame a group in psychology behind conspiracy theories. By definition, conspiracy theories are based on a belief that a specific group or organization is behind a specific event or occurrence. This brings xenophobia into play, as it is much easier to blame a foreign group rather than making sense of the event with tangible evidence. Being that conspiracy theories are often stem from emotional conviction, prejudice, there is typically not a positive connotation associated with them. People feel more comfortable placing blame rather than making sense of something, almost making these groups serve as scapegoats.
I say that when major events happen that affect so many people and so many different groups, that it's best to rely on the facts and not try to come up with the most random explanation to try and make ourselves feel better. Being open-minded helps us try and figure out the true case of why tragedies happen.
To wrap this up, an important takeaway is that echo chambers trap us in a repeated beliefs, fueling misinformation and division. Breaking free requires questioning, seeking credible sources, and staying open to diverse perspectives.
Thank you guys for coming on our podcast and discussing your beliefs on the Boston bombing.
Yeah, you guys had an explosive amount of information. Thank you guys for opening my eyes. You guys are truly the bomb.
No, yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for the invite. But yeah, people go to explosive lengths to believe anything.
Yeah, thanks for having me, but ain't nothing changed my mind about them Muslims, though.
Once again, this podcast included podcast hosts Alicia, Hannah, Robert, and Yesenia, and skeptics Caleb, Matthew, and Andres. And that's the Decoding the Truth podcast. Thanks for listening. If you liked our podcast today, don't forget to subscribe and have a wonderful, truthful day.